Good morning, everyone. I'm back. uh, right now, I am currently in chapter 47 of David Copperfield, but somebody wrote to me the other day and said, "Hey, where's chapter 1?" And I was just organizing my videos, and I thought, oh wow, I'm missing chapter 1 through 5 of David Copperfield. I don't know where it is. It's like it disappeared. So we're going to reread chapter 1 through 5 of David Copperfield. Not today, just chapter 1. So if this is your first time watching, we're reading through it, but we're also stopping and talking about vocabulary words as we go. So if you're learning English and you're pretty advanced and you want to acquire a more advanced vocabulary, this is a good way to do it. So there will be expressions or words that sometimes I'll stop and explain. And I'm doing this live, so if you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you to ask questions about words or phrases in the comments, and I will stop and explain them. That's the whole point of doing this, so don't think that you're interrupting me. If you don't ask questions, then I'll just sometimes stop when I think there's a useful word or phrase or something that could be very good for you. So definitely make questions in the comments. All right, well, let's get started again with chapter 1 of David Copperfield. Let's see. Chapter 1. I am born. Whether I shall turn out to be, and by the way, turn out is a phrasal verb which means kind of like surprise result. We don't know what the result will be, so it's a complete surprise when we get the result. So whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anyone else, these pages must show. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I have been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night. It was remarked that the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously. When the clock strikes, that's when it hits the hour, and usually there's a little bell or something. So the clock strikes 12, and then ding, 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 it's 12 o'clock, and just at that time, that's when Davy was born, exactly at midnight. In consideration of the day and hour of my birth, it was declared by a nurse, and by some sage women in the neighborhood. Sage means wise, some like wise old women in the neighborhood who had taken a lively interest in me several months before there was any possibility of our becoming personally acquainted. First, that I was destined to be unlucky in life, and secondly, that I was privileged to see the ghosts and spirits, both these gifts inevitably attaching, as they believed, to all unlucky infants of either gender born towards the small hours on a Friday night. So I guess it was very unlucky of him to be born on a Friday night at around midnight. And so he would be cursed with bad luck and also be able to communicate with spirits. I need say nothing here on the first head, because nothing can show better than my history whether that prediction was verified or falsified by result. So Davy's saying, I don't have to tell you if I'm lucky or unlucky. You'll see my story and you can decide if I've been lucky or unlucky in my life. On the second branch of the question, I will only remark, and remark means say or mention. I will only remark that unless I ran through the part of my inheritance while I was still a baby, I have not yet come into it. But I do not at all complain of having been kept out of this property, and if anybody else should be in the present enjoyment of it, he is heartily welcome to keep it. I was born with a caul, which was advertised for sale. I remember reading this a long time ago when I first started, and I had to look up that word call because I didn't know what it was, and I still don't remember what it is. A caul is the amniotic membrane enclosing the fetus. So I guess it's maybe some kind of... I was born with a caul, which was advertised for sale in the newspaper at the low price of 15 guineas. So the membrane, like the bubble that the baby is born in, was offered for sale. That's so gross. What did they do with it? Let's see. Miriam says, oh, hi. Miriam, was it you who said, where's chapter 1 of David Copperfield? Somebody asked me that the other day, and I thought, oh, I'm sure it's there, but it's not. I'm missing the first 5 chapters. I don't know what happened to them, so I'm redoing it right now. Let's see. Wait, I want to see, what do people do? What do people do with a piece of membrane that can cover a newborn's head or face? Birth with a caul is rare. It's something that it doesn't happen to every child. It just happens once in every 80,000 births. A child is born with a caul, which I guess is some kind of covering over the face. Okay, so for some reason it was advertised for sale. Maybe people think it has some kind of magical property. At the low price of 15 guineas. Whether sea-going people were short of money about that time, or were short of faith and preferred cork jackets, I don't know. All I know is that there was but one solitary bidding, and that was from an attorney connected with the bill-broking business, who offered £2 in cash and the balance in sherry, but declined to be guaranteed from drowning on any higher bargain. Consequently, the advertisement was withdrawn at a dead loss. For as to sherry, my poor dear mother's own sherry was in the market then, and 10 years afterwards the caul was put up in a raffle down in our part of the country. A raffle is like a lottery. I don't know what's so valuable about this thing. I guess people think it's magical or something. To 50 members at half a crown a head, the winner to spend 5 shillings. I was present myself, and I remember to have felt quite uncomfortable and confused at a part of myself being disposed of in that way. The caul was won, I recollect, by an old lady with a hand-basket, who very reluctantly produced from it the stipulated 5 shillings, and all in halfpence, and 2 pence, halfpenny short. So these are all different kinds of currency, Victorian-era currency. As it took an immense time and a great waste of arithmetic to endeavor without any effect to prove to her, it is a fact which will be long remembered as remarkable down there, that she was never drowned, but died triumphantly in bed at 92. So there must be some kind of... people think that if you have one of these cauls, one of these rare things, you will never drown, so you will never die in the water. Because the man who offered to buy it first was afraid of drowning, and then this woman died of old age, and people said, yeah, look, it works. She didn't die from drowning, she died of old age. Some kind of superstition, I guess. Anne is asking about the word stipulate. A stipulation is like an exception or a clause. So where was that used? Stipulate. It's like a rule that you have to follow in an agreement. Where was it? Okay, from the stipulated 5 shillings. So the agreed price was 5 shillings. That was the agreement. She has to pay 5 shillings. But she didn't have it. That's why he's calling it stipulated. She agreed to pay that much, but she didn't, because she was 1 penny short, which doesn't sound like very much. I have understood that it was, to the last, her proudest boast, that she never had been on the water in her life except upon a bridge, and that over her tea, to which she was extremely partial, she, to the last, expressed her indignation at the impiety of mariners and others, who had the presumption to go meandering about the world. It was in vain to represent to her that some conveniences, tea perhaps included, resulted from this objectionable practice. So this woman who bought the call, she was complaining, oh, why do these people go in their boats into the sea that's so dangerous? They're so stupid, as she drinks her tea that she loves so much. And of course, the only reason she has tea is because of them. And meandering means going from place to place. So, let's see. She always returned with greater emphasis, with instinctive knowledge of strength of her objection, let us have no meandering. Meandering means going from place to place. So people shouldn't be going from this place to that place to this place. Anna's asking about the word impiety. Where was that? I don't even remember seeing that word impiety. Oh, at the impiety of mariners. Well, a pious person is like a very religious person who follows all of the rules, like a very moral person. So if somebody is pious, it means they have like the highest morals. And an impious person is a person with no morals. So when she talks about mariners, the Marines, the people who travel from country to country on boats, are very impious people. It's a very immoral thing to be traveling from country to country. I think sailors have always had a very bad reputation. In English, you can say spend money like a drunken sailor, or swearing like a sailor, saying bad words like a sailor. I don't know if that exists in other languages, but it does in English. So remember, meander means going from place to place with no direction. And that's literally like walking from place to place, moving from place to place with no destination. But you can also use it in an abstract way to mean getting off the topic, moving away from the subject, moving away from the topic. And that's what Davy says next. He says, not to meander myself, not to go off the subject. At present, I will go back to my birth. I was born at Blunderstone in Suffolk, and thereby, as they say in Scotland, I was a posthumous child. My father's eyes had closed upon the light. Posthumous means after death. So he's saying I was born after someone's death, and he's referring to his father. My father's eyes had closed upon the light of the world 6 months when mine opened on it. So his father died 6 months before he was born. There's something strange to me even now in the reflection that he never saw me. And something stranger yet in the shadowy remembrance that I have of my first childish associations with his white gravestone in the churchyard, and of the indefinable compassion I used to feel for it, lying out alone there on a dark night, when our little parlor was warm and bright with fire and candle, and the doors of our house were, almost cruelly it seemed to me sometimes, bolted and locked against it. An aunt of my father's, and consequently a great-aunt of mine, of whom I shall have more to relate by and by, that means later, by and by, was the principal magnate of our family, Miss Trotwood, or Miss Betsy, as my poor mother always called her, when she sufficiently overcame her dread of this formidable personage to mention her at all, which was seldom, had been married to a husband younger than herself, who was very handsome, except in the sense of the homely adage, handsome is that handsome does, which means you're not really beautiful unless you act beautifully, which Betsy Trotwood has the reputation for not acting kindly or beautifully. She's very rude to people. For he was strongly suspected of having beaten Miss Betsy, and even having once, on a disputed question of supplies, made some hasty determined arrangements to throw her out of a 2 pair of stairs. Adage. Miriam's asking about the word adage. An adage is like an expression, like a saying that people always repeat. But wait, I just want to check my definition. A proverb or a short statement expressing a general truth. So, those little things that people always say to express feelings or some kind of sentiment. So the old adage is, handsome is as handsome does. So you're only really beautiful if you behave in a beautiful way. And so that's like a universal truth. That's an adage. These evidences of incompatibility of temper induced Miss Betsy to pay him off. When you pay someone off, it could mean several things, but here it sounds like she paid him money to leave her, to go away, to leave her alone. Miriam says, is that a maxim? Is an adage a maxim? I wonder. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Let's see. Yeah, they're pretty much the same thing. Okay. These evidences of incompatibility of temper induced Miss Betsy to pay him off, and effect a separation by mutual consent. He went to India with his capital. Capital means money for investing. And there, according to a wild legend in our family, he was once seen riding on an elephant in company with a baboon. But I think it must have been a babu or a begum. Anyhow, from India, tidings means news. News of his death reached home. Tidings of his death reached home. Within 10 years. How they affected my aunt, nobody knew. For immediately upon the separation, she took her maiden name again, bought a cottage in the hamlet on the sea coast, and a long way off established herself there as a single woman with one servant, and was understood to live secluded, even afterwards, in an inflexible retirement. My father had once been a favorite of hers, I believe, but she was mortally affronted by his marriage. So Betsy Trotwood, Aunt Betsy, was offended by this marriage that her nephew made. Miriam's asking about epigram. Well, let's see. An epigram is a It seems to me that I'm just looking up the definition of epigram while you're asking. And it seems that an epigram would have something clever or funny in it, something interesting. So when if you have an adage or a maxim, the focus is on a truth that you could live by. But apparently an epigram, which I don't think is an extremely conscious common word, the difference is that These are something that you say that makes you laugh a little bit. So the focus is on humor, something smart and funny. So I think they're a little bit different. My father had once been a favorite of hers, I believe, but she was mortally affronted by his marriage. So she hated that he got married on the ground that my mother was a wax doll. And she had never seen my mother, but she knew her to be not yet 20. My father and Miss Betsy never met again. He was double my mother's age when he married, and of but a delicate constitution. He died a year afterwards, and, as I've said, 6 months before I came into the world. This was the state of matters on the afternoon of what I may be excused for calling that eventful and important Friday. I can make no claim, therefore, that I have known, at that time, how matters stood, or to have any remembrance founded on the evidence of my own senses of what follows. My mother was sitting by the fire, but poorly in health, and very low in spirits, looking at it through her tears, and desponding heavily about herself, and the fatherless little stranger, who was already welcomed by some grosses of prophetic pins in the drawer upstairs, to a world not at all excited on the subject of his arrival. My mother, I say, was sitting by the fire that bright, windy March afternoon, very timid and sad, and very doubtful of ever coming alive out of the trial that was before her, when, lifting her eyes as she dried them to the window opposite, she saw a strange lady coming up the garden. Anne is asking about the word desponding. Despondent means like to be sad. Desponding. Maybe like feeling hopeless. Maybe that would be the best. So if you're despondent, you're feeling very hopeless. Where was that word? It's funny how I can read these words and then 5 minutes later I have no idea that I read it. Desponding heavily about herself and her fatherless little stranger. So she's feeling very hopeless. She's just sitting in that chair thinking, oh my God, I'm so young. I'm about to have a baby. My husband is dead. So she's feeling all that hopelessness. My mother had a sure foreboding at a second glance that it was Miss Betsy. The setting sun was glowing on the strange lady over the garden fence, and she came walking up to the door with a fell rigidity of figure and composure of countenance that could have belonged to no one else. So remember, countenance is like the how you express yourself through your face. If you look happy, you have a happy countenance. If your face looks sad, you have a sad countenance. But it's kind of a permanent thing. It's like an idea of character that you can get from somebody's face. And he said that could be nobody else's countenance except Miss Betsy Trotwood. When she reached the house, she gave another proof of her identity. My father had often hinted that she seldom conducted herself like an ordinary Christian, and now, instead of ringing the bell, she came and looked in at that identical window, pressing the end of her nose against the glass to that extent that my poor dear mother used to say it became perfectly flat and white in a moment. She gave my mother such a turn that I have always been convinced I am indebted to Miss Betsy for having been born on a Friday. So he's saying she scared my mother so much that that's the reason I was born. I came out from fear. My mother had left her chair in agitation. Agitation means like annoyed. And gone behind in the corner. Miss Betsy, looking round the room slowly and inquiringly, began on the other side and carried her eyes on, like Sarsen's head, in a Dutch, like a Saracen's head in a Dutch clock. Until they reached my mother, and then she made a frown. A gesture to my mother, like one who was accustomed to be obeyed, to come and open the door. And my mother went. So Betsy's looking out the window saying, "Open the door." "Mrs. David Copperfield, I think," said Miss Betsy, the emphasis referring, perhaps, to my mother's mourning weeds and her condition. "Yes," said my mother faintly. "Miss Trotwood," said the visitor. "You've heard of her, I dare say." My mother answered she had that pleasure, and she had a disagreeable consciousness of not appearing to imply that it had been an overpowering pleasure. So the mother's like, "Yeah, I know who you are." Not in a very friendly way, because she knows Betsy Trotwood has a reputation. They went into the parlor my mother had come from, and the fire in the best room on the other side of the passage not being lighted, not having been lighted, indeed, since my father's funeral. And when they were both seated, and Miss Betsy said nothing, my mother, after vainly trying to restrain herself, began to cry. "Oh, tut, tut, tut," said Miss Betsy in a hurry. "Don't do that. Come, come." My mother couldn't help it, notwithstanding, so she cried until she had her cry out. So when you have your cry out, that means you're finished. You can't cry anymore. "Take off your cap, child," said Miss Betsy, "and let me see you." My mother was too much afraid of her to refuse compliance with this odd request, if she had any disposition to do so. Therefore, she did as she was told, and did it with such nervous hands that her hair, which was luxuriant and beautiful, fell all about her face. "Well, bless my heart," exclaimed Miss Betsy, "you're a very baby." My mother was, no doubt, unusually youthful in appearance, even for her years. She hung her head as if it were her fault, poor thing, and said, sobbing as that indeed she was afraid that she was but a childish widow, and would be but a childish mother if she lived. In a short pause which ensued, she had a fancy that she felt Miss Betsy touch her hair, that with no ungentle hand, but looking at her, in her timid hope, she found that the lady sitting there with the skirt of her dress tucked up, her hands folded on one knee, and her feet upon the fender, frowning at the fire. "In the name of heaven," said Miss Betsy suddenly, "why rookery?" "Do you mean the house, ma'am?" asked my mother. "Why rookery?" said Miss Betsy. "Cookery would have been more to the purpose if you had any practical ideas of life, either of you." The name was Mr. Copperfield's choice. She's asking about the name of the house. The house is called the Rookery, and rooks are a type of bird. "The name was Mr. Copperfield's choice," returned my mother. "When he bought the house, he liked to think that there were rooks about it." The evening wind made such a disturbance just now, among some tall old elm trees at the bottom of the garden, and neither my mother nor Miss Betsy could forbear glancing that way, as the elms bent to one another like giants that were whispering secrets, and after a few seconds of such repose fell into a violent flurry, tossing their wild arms about, as with their late confidences were really too wicked for their peace of mind. Some weather-beaten, ragged old rook's nest, burdening their higher branches, swung like wrecks upon a stormy sea. "Where are the birds?" asked Miss Betsy. My mother had been thinking of something else. "The rooks. What has become of them?" asked Miss Betsy. "There have not been any since we've lived here," said my mother. Mr. Copperfield thought, it was quite a large rookery, but the nests were very old ones, and the birds have deserted them a long while." "David Copperfield all over," cried Miss Betsy. "David Copperfield from head to foot calls a house a rookery when there's not a rook near it, and takes the birds on trust because he sees the nests." "Mr. Copperfield," returned my mother, "is dead, and if you dare to speak unkindly of him to me—" My poor dear mother, I suppose, had some momentary intention of committing an assault and battery upon my aunt. Remember that word, Miriam? Right? We were talking about battery earlier today. Beat, battery, assault and battery. That is the crime. If someone comes to you and does this, that's a crime. That's called battery. That's the actual name of the crime. And so his mother, even though she's about to have a baby and she's very sad and depressed and despondent, meaning hopeless, was considering committing battery on Mrs. Betsy Trotwood, who could easily have settled her own with one hand, even if my mother had been in far better training for such an encounter than she was that evening. But it passed with the action of rising from her chair, and she sat down again, very meekly, and fainted. When she came to... So she fainted. She lost consciousness for a minute. And then if you faint, if you lose consciousness, when you wake up again, that's called coming to. So when she came to herself, or when Miss Betsy had restored her, whichever it was, she found the ladders standing at the window. Uh-oh, I've gone blurry. Oh, I have to fix my camera. Alright, I'm going to take a 1-minute break, and then I will be right back. I hope you don't leave. Don't leave. And we'll continue this in 1 minute, but let me just first fix my camera. Is it fixed? Let's see. Yes, okay. So I'm just going to take a 1-minute break, and I will be right back. Okay, thank you for waiting. Sorry about that. All right, let's continue. Twilight was by this time shading down into darkness, and dimly, as they saw each other, they could not have done without the aid of the fire. "Well," said Miss Betsy, coming back to her chair, as if she had only been taking a casual look at the prospect. Actually, I think... Oh, I was reading chapter 46 last night of this book, and they were talking about prospect, and I was thinking about mentioning what that means here, but I didn't. But I guess now I feel guilty, and I should say that I think prospect here means like the view. "Well," said Miss Betsy, coming back to her chair as if she had only been taking a casual look at the prospect, "and what do you expect?" "I'm all in a tremble," faltered my mother. "I don't know what's the matter. I shall die, I'm sure." No, 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 said Miss Betsy. Have some tea. Oh, dear me, dear me. Do you think it will do me any good? Cried my mother in a helpless manner. Of course it will, said Miss Betsy. It's nothing but fancy. What do you call your girl? What she means here by it's nothing but fancy. Fancy here kind of means like fantasy. Like it's just in your imagination. That's what she means by that. What do you call your girl? I don't know that it will be a girl yet, ma'am, said my mother innocently. Bless the baby, exclaimed Miss Betsy, unconsciously quoting the sentiment of the pincushion in the drawer upstairs, but applying it to my mother instead of me. I don't mean that. I mean your servant girl. Peggotty. Peggotty, said my mother. Anne is asking about the word falter. The word falter means to hesitate. Where was that? Oh, I don't see it. Okay. So what's the name of your servant girl? Peggotty, said my mother. Peggotty? Repeated Miss Betsy with some indignation. Do you mean to say, child, that any human being has gone into a Christian church and got herself named Peggotty? It's her surname, said my mother faintly. Mr. Copperfield called her by it because her Christian name was the same as mine. Here, Peggotty. Here, Peggotty, cried Miss Betsy, opening the parlor door. Tea, your mistress is a little unwell. Don't dawdle. Dawdling means taking your time, like being lazy and not working. So when she says don't dawdle, that means hurry up. Do it quickly. Don't take your time about it. Having issued this mandate with as much potentiality as if she had been the recognized authority in the house ever since it had been a house, and having looked out to confront the amazed Peggotty coming along the passage with a candle at the sound of a strange voice, Miss Betsy shut the door again and sat down as before, with her feet on the fender and the skirt of her dress tucked up, and her hands folded on one knee. You were speaking about its being a girl, said Miss Betsy. I have no doubt it will be a girl. I have a presentiment that it must be a girl. Now, child, from the moment of the birth of this girl, perhaps a boy, my mother took the liberty of putting in, I tell you I have a presentiment. I think that must mean like prediction. I guess we better look up that word, presentiment. It's not like a contemporary word that you would use now, but let's see. Presentiment. An intuitive feeling about the future. I tell you I have a presentiment that it must be a girl, returned Miss Betsy. Don't contradict. From the moment of this girl's birth, child, I intend to be her friend. I intend to be her godmother. I beg you'll call her Betsy Trotwood Copperfield. There must be no mistakes in life with this Betsy Trotwood. There must be no trifling with her affections, poor dear. She must be well brought up and well guarded from reposing any foolish confidences where they are not deserved. I must make that my care. There was a twitch of Miss Betsy's head. A twitch is like a small, quick movement. It's like a twitch. It's just a small, quick movement. After each sentence, as if her own old wrongs were working within her, and she repressed any plainer reference to them by strong constraint. So my mother suspected, at least, as she observed by the low glimmer of the fire, too much scared by Miss Betsy, too uneasy in herself, and too subdued and bewildered altogether to observe anything very clearly or to know what to say. "And was David good to you, child?" asked Miss Betsy, when she had been silent for a little while, and these motions of her head had gradually ceased. "Were you comfortable together?" "We were very comfortable," said my mother. "Mr. Copperfield was only too good to me." "Well, he spoiled you, I suppose," returned Miss Betsy. "For being quite alone and dependent on myself in this rough world again. Yes, I fear he did indeed," sobbed my mother. "Well, don't cry," said Miss Betsy. "You are not equally matched, child, if any two people can be equally matched. And so I asked the question. You were an orphan, weren't you? Yes? And a governess?" "I was a nursery governess in a family where Mr. Copperfield came to visit. Mr. Copperfield was very kind to me, and took a great deal of notice of me, and paid me a good deal of attention, and at last proposed to me, and I accepted him. And so we were married," said my mother simply. "Ha! Poor baby!" mused Miss Betsy with her frown still bent upon the fire. "Do you know anything?" Miriam says, "Oh, she named her son after her husband." "Yes, that's right." "I beg your pardon, ma'am," faltered my mother. So here's that word falter again. So falter means like hesitating. So the reason she would hesitate is maybe she's confused. She doesn't know how to react in this situation. "I beg your pardon?" There's like a hesitation, like, what? "About keeping house, for instance," said Betsy. "Not much, I fear," returned my mother. "Not so much as I could wish. But Mr. Copperfield was teaching me." "Much he knew about it himself," said Miss Betsy in a parenthesis. "And I hope I should have improved, being very anxious to learn, and he very patient to teach me, if the great misfortune of his death—" My mother broke down again here. To break down means to start crying, to lose your composure. My mother broke down again here, and could go no further. "Well, well," said Miss Betsy. "I kept my housekeeping book regularly and balanced it with Mr. Copperfield every night," cried my mother in an outburst of distress. An outburst is like an explosion. And breaking down again, and breaking down is like starting to cry a lot. "And I'm sure we never had a word of difference respecting it, except when Mr. Copperfield objected to my 3s and 5s being too much like each other, or to my putting curly tails to my 7s and 9s, resumed my mother in a burst, and breaking down again. "You'll make yourself ill," said Miss Betsy, "and you know that will not be good for either for you or my goddaughter. Come, you mustn't do it." This argument had some share in quieting my mother, though her increasing indisposition had a larger one. There was an interval of silence, only broken by Miss Betsy's occasionally ejaculating "Ha!" as she sat with her feet upon the fender. David had bought an annuity for himself, and with his money, I know, said she by and by. "What did he do for you?" "Mr. Copperfield," said my mother, answering with some difficulty, "was so considerate and good as to secure the reversion of a part of it to me." "How much?" asked Miss Betsy. £105 a year," said my mother. "He might have done worse," said my aunt. Anne is asking about the word annuity. Whenever you see that word annual, that's a Latin word, which anno, which means year. So annual means every year. And how else do we use that for anything else? There must be. Well, so an annuity is like a financial instrument, which every year you get paid a certain amount of money. So they still use annuities. It's like a financial investment where they pay you every year. The word was appropriate to the moment. My mother was so much worse than Peggotty, coming in with the tea-board and candles and seeing at a glance how ill she was, as Miss Betsy might have done sooner if there had been light enough, conveyed her upstairs to her own room with all speed, and immediately dispatched Ham Peggotty, her nephew, who had been for some days past secreted in the house, unknown to my mother, as a special messenger in case of emergency to fetch the nurse and doctor. And we've seen that word fetch before. That means go and get something and make it come and return it to the original place. So to fetch the doctor would be to go get the doctor and bring him to the house. Those allied powers were considerably astonished when they arrived within a few minutes of each other to find an unknown lady of portentous appearance sitting before the fire with her bonnet tied over her left arm, stopping her ears with jeweler's cotton. Miriam's asking about secreted. Well, you wouldn't, in contemporary English, you wouldn't use secret in this way. Let's see if we can guess. Where did it go? Where's Ham? So some days passed, meaning a few days ago, maybe 4 or 5 days ago. That's what some days means. It means like a couple of days, 4 or 5 days, something like that. For some days past, he was secreted in the house. So they're using secret like a verb here. You wouldn't do that in contemporary English. That would be weird. But that just means that Peggotty hid her nephew in secret in the house because she knew that eventually somebody would have to go and run and get the doctor. And Peggotty wanted to stay there to take care of the mother. So she hid her nephew in the house for that purpose. Some days ago, 4 or 5 days ago, or something. Do you know, and Anna's asking about the word dispatch. You know, if there's a fire, you know, you call the emergency number, and you're not really calling the fire department, you're calling like an operator. And then the operator will contact the fire department and say, go to this address. Or maybe if you call the police because of battery. You don't call the police directly, you call some type of operator. And the job of this operator is to find out your location and then send the police. Before Uber, if you called a taxi, you didn't call the car directly, you called like a central telephone number, and they would send the taxi to your house. And this job is a dispatcher. So dispatching means sending people places. Or sending things places. How did they use it here? So she hid Ham, she secreted Ham into the house to dispatch him to the doctor. To send him to go get the doctor and bring the doctor back. Those allied powers were considerably astonished when they arrived. Oh wait, we already read that part. Peggotty knowing nothing about her, and my mother saying nothing about her. She was quite a mystery in the parlor, and the fact of her having a magazine of jeweler's cotton in her pocket and sticking the article in her ears in that way did not detract means take away, from the solemnity of her presence. So she looks very ridiculous. She put some cotton in her ears for I don't know what reason. And she's got her hat tied around her arm. She's a very strange woman. But that didn't detract from how serious and intimidating she looked. Anne is asking about the word parlor. Well, you know, that comes from the French word parler, which means to talk. And the parlor is like the main... People don't really say that in contemporary English. But especially like 100 years ago or more, You would call the principal room of the house, the place where you would receive company, the parlor. That's the room where you would sit and talk and have conversations. The doctor, having been upstairs and come down again, and having satisfied himself, I suppose, that there was a probability of this unknown lady and himself having to sit there face to face for some hours. There you have that word "some" again, to mean like an unquantified, like 2 or 3 or 4 hours, just like for some days past, for some hours, maybe for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. So the doctor was worried. Oh no, I have to sit in the parlor with Betsy Trotwood maybe for 3 or 4 hours. What am I going to do? This lady's crazy. Laid himself out to be polite and social. He was the meekest of his sex. So meek means very gentle. The mildest of little men. Mild, again, not strong, not weak, somewhere in the middle. But mild here kind of means weak. Soft, gentle. Anne is asking about laid out. How did they use it? Laid himself out to be polite. So I think that just means, again, this is not something in contemporary English that you have to worry about. But I think that just means he was trying to show that he's very open to talking and being nice and having a friendly conversation. I think that's what it means here. He sidled in and out of the room to take up less space. He walked as softly as the ghost in Hamlet, and more slowly. He carried his head on one side, and partly in modest deprecation of himself, partly in modest propitiation of everybody else. It is nothing to say that he hadn't a word to throw at a dog. He couldn't have thrown a word at a mad dog. He might have offered him one gently, or half a one, or a fragment of one, for he spoke as slowly as he walked. But he wouldn't have been rude. He wouldn't have been rude to him. He couldn't have been quick with him for any earthly consideration. Mr. Chillip, looking mildly at my aunt with his head on one side and making her a little bow, said in allusion to the jeweler's cotton as he softly touched his left ear. So for some reason Betsy Trotwood put some cotton in her ear. And now he's saying, some local irritation, man? Like, is something bothering you? Is something bothering your ear? What? Replied my aunt, pulling the cotton out of one ear like a cork. Mr. Chillip was so alarmed by her abruptness, as he told my mother afterwards, that it was a mercy he didn't lose his presence of mind, but he repeated sweetly, some local irritation, ma'am? Nonsense, replied my aunt, and corked herself again at one blow. Mr. Chillip could do nothing after this but sit and look at her feebly as she sat and looked at the fire until he was called upstairs again. After some quarter of an hour's absence, he returned. Well, said my aunt, taking the cotton out of the air nearest to him. Well, ma'am, returned Mr. Chillip, we are progressing slowly, ma'am. Bah, said my aunt, with a perfect shake on a contemptuous interjection, and corked herself as before. Really, as Mr. Chillip told my mother, he was almost shocked, speaking in a professional point of view, alone. He was almost shocked, but he sat and looked at her notwithstanding for nearly 2 hours, and she sat looking at the fire until he was again called out. After another absence, he again returned. Well, said my aunt, taking the cotton out of on that side again. Well, ma'am, returned Mr. Chillip, we are progressing Slowly, ma'am. Anne is asking about interjection. That's like interrupting. Let's see. Bah, said my aunt with a perfect shake on the contemptuous interjection. So, it's not really interrupting here. It's just saying something or shouting something. Well, we better... Okay, I don't trust my definition. Let's look it up. Let's see. An interjection is a word or phrase used to express a feeling or a request or to demand something. While interjections are a part of speech, they're not grammatically connected to other parts of speech. So a word like "oh," that could, that's an interjection, or "uh-oh," or "wow." Those are all. But Betsy Trotwood's interjection was "bah," because she's annoyed. So it is like an interruption. It's something that you can interrupt somebody with. Wow, oh, bah. Well, ma'am, returned Mr. Chillip, we are progressing. Slowly, ma'am. Yeah, said my aunt, with such a snarl at him. A snarl, that's like what a dog does. Not the noise, the facial. That's a snarl. That Mr. Chillip absolutely could not bear it. It was really calculated to break his spirit, he said afterwards. He preferred to go and sit upon the stairs in the dark and a strong draught until he was again set for. Ham Peggotty, who went to the National School and was a very dragon at his catechism, and who may therefore be regarded as a credible witness, reported the next day that happening to peep in at the parlor door, an hour after this, he was instantly descried by Miss Betsy, and then walking to and fro in a state of agitation, and pounced. Pounce is like attack. Think about the way a cat jumps on something, and pounced upon before he could make his escape. That there were now occasional sounds of feet and voices overheard, which he inferred the cotton did not exclude, by the lady as a victim on whom to expend her superabundant agitation when the sounds were loudest. Anne is asking about catechism. Catechism is part of a religious education. And I mean, I don't think they're Catholic, but as far as I know, that was just a Catholic thing. Well, let me see. Yeah, it's a Catholic thing, but it would be strange, I think, if they were Catholic here. No, it says of Western Christianity, so other Christian denominations also have it. But it's part of like the religious education. So when it says that Ham Peggotty was the best at his catechism, it means he took his religious education very seriously. So you could trust what he was saying because he would never lie. She at those times shook him, rumpled his hair, made light of his linen, stopped his ears, as if she confounded them with her own, and otherwise tussled and maltreated him. This was in part confirmed by his aunt, who saw him at 12:30, soon after his release, and affirmed that he was then as red as I was. My old Mr. Chillip could not possibly bear malice at such a time, if at any time he sidled into the parlor. We keep seeing that word sidled, and I think we've talked about it before, but I don't remember what the definition is. To walk in a timid way, so in a very gentle way, in a very scared way. in a way to not offend anyone. He sidled into the parlor as soon as he was at liberty, and said to my aunt in his meekest manner, "Well, ma'am, I'm happy to congratulate you." "What upon?" said my aunt sharply. Mr. Chillip was fluttered again by the extreme severity of my aunt's manner. So he made her a little bow and gave her a little smile to mollify her. Mollify. Well, let's get the meaning of mollify. Appease the anger or anxiety of someone. So to calm her down. Let's just say to calm her down. "Mercy on the man, what's he doing?" cried my aunt impatiently. "Can't he speak?" "Be calm, my dear ma'am," said Mr. Chillip in his softest accents. "There's no longer any occasion for uneasiness, ma'am. Be calm." It has since been considered almost a miracle that my aunt didn't shake him, and shake what he had to say out of him. She only shook her own head at him, but in a way that made him quail. "Well, ma'am," resumed Mr. Chillip as soon as he had the courage, "I'm happy to congratulate you. All is now over, ma'am, and well over." During the 5 minutes or so that Mr. Chillip devoted to the delivery of this oration, an oration is like a speech, my aunt eyed him narrowly. That's eyeing someone narrowly. You make your eyes narrow. "How is she?" said my aunt, folding her arms with her bonnet still tied to one of them. "Well, ma'am, she will soon be quite comfortable, I hope," returned Mr. Chillip. "Quite as comfortable as we can expect a young mother to be under these melancholy domestic circumstances. There cannot be any objection to your seeing her presently, ma'am. It may do her good." "And she, how is she?" said my aunt sharply. Mr. Chillip laid his head a little more to one side and looked at my aunt like an amiable bird. Amiable means friendly. "The baby," said my aunt, "how is she?" "Ma'am," returned Mr. Chillip, "I apprehended you had known it's a boy." My aunt never said a word, but took her bonnet by the strings in a manner of a sling, aimed a blow at Mr. Chillip's head with it, put it on bent, walked out, and never back. She vanished, like a discontented fairy. Discontented means angry. Or like one of those supernatural beings whom it was popular supposed I was entitled to see, and never came back any more. Now I lay in my basket, and my mother lay in her bed, but Miss Betsy Trotwood Copperfield was forever in the land of dreams and shadows, the tremendous region whence I had so lately travelled, and the light upon the window of our room shone out upon the earthly bourne of all such travellers, and the mound above the ashes, and the dust that once was he, without whom I had never been. N is asking what a sling is. Well, actually, I think I better show you this picture. A sling is something like this, you know. And Betsy has a bonnet. Let me show you what a bonnet is. This is a bonnet. So when she came into the house, she took her bonnet off and she tied it around her arm. And then when she got angry, when she discovered that it wasn't a girl but a boy, she took the bonnet off to put it back on, but she kind of held it like this. It looked like a weapon, like she was going to attack the doctor with it. So she held it like a sling, and then she put it on her head. I don't think she did that on purpose. It's just she has a very aggressive way she has very aggressive mannerisms. Okay, well, that was the end of chapter 1 of David Copperfield. So I just discovered, I don't know what happened to my first 5 chapters of the book. They disappeared. They're not there. So I will be doing chapter 2. I'll probably be reading chapter 47 tonight. But, maybe sometime tomorrow or the next day I'll read chapter 2 and 3 and 4 until we have all the chapters again. I don't know. They disappeared. All right. Well, thank you for Miriam's asking about born. Where did you see the word born? I don't see it, but the last paragraph. Okay, wait, let me see. I had traveled, light upon the window, shone out, earthly born of all such travelers. Oh, okay, so this is pretty fancy language here. Let's see. Betsy Trotwood Copperfield was forever in the land of dreams and shadows, the tremendous region whence I had so lately traveled. And the light upon the window of our room shone out upon the earthly born of all such travelers. Wow, I'm not even really sure how they're using born here. And it's spelled in a funny way. Born usually means, it could mean like something heavy to carry or something produced. But I wouldn't spell it like this. This could just be a weird old British spelling. Let's see. A limit or boundary, a goal or a destination. But that's without an E. Born of all such travelers, and the mound above the ashes and dust that once was he, without whom I had never been. Boundary? Does that work? Sirkan is saying, Sirkan, I just noticed that my first 5 chapters, I'm about to make a playlist because actually we're getting close to the end of the entire book, David Copperfield. There are maybe, I think, like 15 chapters left. So I want to organize it in a playlist. And so I was doing that this morning and I discovered, I don't know what happened to chapters 1 through 5. They're gone. They're disappeared. So I'm rereading chapter 1 through 5 so that I can have a complete playlist. I hope the other chapters aren't missing too. Well, we'll have to see. I'll be organizing it soon. Anyway, so we're just rereading the first 5 chapters. But I will be reading chapter 47 tonight if you want to see it. That would be in about 10 hours. So, yeah, I'm not sure what born means here. That's born... Let's see. Tremendous region whence I had so lately traveled, and the light upon the window of our room shone out upon the earthly born. Maybe it just means born, B-O-R-N, like the people born on Earth. And it's just a weird old spelling of it, because I don't really see how else you could use it here in any of the ways that I know born. And B-O-U-R-N, according to Google, a limit or boundary. Like those limited to Earth. Let's see. Shone upon those limited to those bound by Earth. Okay, maybe it means bound. Those people who have to stay here on Earth. Okay. All right. So, well, if you're not doing anything in 10 hours, maybe you'd like to join me for chapter 47. And then maybe tomorrow I'll be reading also chapter 2 sometime in the afternoon if I have time. All right. Well, thank you for all of your questions and comments, and I hope that you come back soon, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.